This is the second lecture on modal mixture. I'm basing my lecture on chapter 23 of Miguel Roig-Francoli's Harmony in Context. One thing that you should consider as we go through this chapter on modal mixture is that you're not really learning any new chords or any new voice leading situations. You already know about the harmonies in the minor mode, and you also know about the particular voice leading situations that come up specifically in the minor mode, namely the importance of avoiding the augmented second from lay up to T. Lay is a very strong tendency tone. It wants to resolve down to sol, and so any chord that has a lay in it, the lay moves down rather than going up to T, giving us that augmented second, the melodic interval that we want to avoid. So what's new in chapter 23 is that we're going to encounter these chords in the context of an overall major key passage, and we still have to think about the particular voice leading situations that come up with the minor mode chords that are borrowed into the passage. I'm going to turn next to my handout for just a quick second. And again, I would suggest that you download this handout and print it out. It would be helpful for you to be able to follow along in the handout. This is available on Canvas in the module called Chapter 23. This lecture will deal with a particular group of mode mixture chords. On the handout, I'm calling it Group 1. These are chords that include scale degree 6, the lower scale degree 6 that we have in minor, in other words, the note lay. We're not going to be talking about te and me in this first group. We could almost think of lay as being the mode mixture note. Almost all mode mixture chords include the note lay, and the resolution of lay down to sol is really important. So it would be a good idea in this unit, anytime that you're dealing with an analytical situation or a chord construction and part writing situation, the first thing that you would want to do is make sure that you know what note is lay, because that's going to help you to recognize mode mixture, and it's also going to help you to be conscious of resolving that note correctly down to sol. So if you're starting to do some kind of problem that's in, let's say, the key of F major, think about what is lay in F major. Okay, in F major, scale degree 6 is D, but if we use the minor scale degree 6 lay, that would be a D flat. So be on the lookout in analysis for chords that include a D flat. Those would be mode mixture chords. And keep a lookout in your part writing for chords that include a D flat, and be sure to resolve the D flat down to C. Okay, first in Group 1 is a chord that's familiar to us. This is 7 diminished 7, which we learned about last semester. This is a mode mixture chord. So think about it. If we were in the key of F major, the leading tone 7th chord that we would have if we just stuck to the key signature would be E, G, B flat, D. That's a half diminished 7th chord. But most of the time in music, we are more likely to find a diminished 7th chord, E, G, B flat, D flat. And now you know what we call that. We call it modal mixture. We're borrowing the D flat from F minor, we're sticking it into an F major context, and we're turning the leading tone 7th chord into a diminished 7th chord. Let me just remind you of the part writing here. Okay, this is actually in the key of D major, so let's do a little bit of thinking here. D major, scale degree 6 in D major is B, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. And the lowered scale degree 6 that we find not in D major but in D minor would be B flat. So I'm going to keep in mind all the time that I'm working in D major that B flat is the note lay. Okay, so here's my 7 diminished 7th chord. It's C sharp, E, G, B flat. The B flat lay must resolve down to sol. Also, it's the chord 7th, so the chordal 7th has to resolve down by step. In fact, all of the upper voices are resolving down by step. Only the leading tone, T, is resolving up to do. And that's the standard voice leading that you would have for a 7 diminished 7 in any inversion. The root goes up, all of the upper voices go down, especially the seventh goes down, and especially the seventh when it involves mode mixture goes down. The most common resolution for a 7 diminished 7 is directly to 1, but it's not all that unusual for the 7 diminished 7, again, whatever inversion it's in, to go first to some inversion of 5. Okay, so here I'm going to move the B flat down to an A. Okay, now I have A, C sharp, E, G, and that's a 5, 6, 5. And now that 5, 6, 5 resolves to 1. Okay, so that's less common, but still something that we see happen. And I'm going to go back to the original here. I'm going to take that out. The other thing that could happen here is that we could have a 7 diminished 4, 2, so that the lay could actually be in the bass, and the lay could resolve down to sol in the bass. Again, it could be taking us to a root position 5, 7 chord. It could also be taking us to a cadential 6, 4, that is a 1, 6, 4 chord that would eventually go to 5 or 5, 7 and then to 1. Let me turn back to my handout. So notice that the handout talks about 7 diminished 7 in various inversions. This is a dominant substitute chord. It has a dominant function. It substitutes for 5. And it must resolve to 1. Or if it doesn't resolve to 1, it could resolve to a cadential or maybe a passing 6, 4, or it could resolve to 5, 7 and then to 1. But the most typical resolution is directly to a 1 chord. Okay, let's turn next to the 4 chord. In D major, 4 is a G major chord, but if we use mode mixture, we substitute a B flat for B natural. So now we have a G minor chord, G, B flat, D, and that's the minor 4. The most common use for the minor 4 chord is as a predominant chord leading to 5, occasionally leading to 7 diminished 6 or 7 diminished 7. In a minute, I'll talk about the possibility of 4 as a tonic prolongation chord or as a chord that's part of a Plagal cadence. But let's first see the example of the predominant 4 chord. Okay, so here's my 4 chord, G minor, G, B flat, D, G. This is a situation where we have 2 root position chords whose roots are a step apart. And you remember that the thing that you have to be careful about here is not having other stepwise motion up that would create parallel fifths or parallel octaves with the bass. So when the bass is stepping up, all of the upper voices are going down, and especially lay is going down to sol. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more bang for my buck here. I'm going to change the 4 chord into a 2 diminished 6 chord. Remember that 2, 6 is really close to 4 in a major key. 2 diminished 6 is really close to 4 in a minor key. The 2 chord in D major would be E, and with the mode mixture, it would be E, G, B flat, a diminished triad. The only note that I need to change to make this into a 2, 6 chord, 2 diminished 6, would be that note, making it an E. So again, bass going up by step, all the upper voices going down, and especially lay going down to sol. And then the 5 resolves to 1. Remember that in minor, the quality of the supertonic chord is, if it's a triad, it's a diminished triad. If it's a 7th chord, it's a half diminished 7th chord, not a diminished 7th chord. So those are the qualities of the mode mixture chords that we're talking about in chapter 23. Please don't get these confused. Please don't tell me that there's a 2 diminished 7th, because there's not. Okay, we've already seen 2 diminished 6 acting as a predominant, leading to 5. Next, I'll show you an example of the 2 half diminished 7 in an inversion leading to 5. Okay, let's look at the final example here on the board. This is a 2 half diminished 7 chord. Okay, the notes are E, G, B flat, and D. Diminished triad, minor 7th. E, G, B flat, D. The lay is in the bass. It must go down to sol. It takes us to a 5/7 chord. There are two notes, E and G, that is Re and Fa, that are common to both chords, so I'm just going to keep them as common tones. And then the 7th is going to resolve down by step to the C sharp. Okay, so we go from the 2 half diminished 4/3 to the 5/7 to the 1. Okay, I'm going to play these examples for you. I'm going to play the second example twice. The first time I'll play the thing that I wrote first, which is the minor 4 going to 5 going to 1. The second time I'll play 2 diminished 6 going to 5 going to 1. Now, the piano in this classroom is really awfully out of tune, so I'm sorry about this. You may really not get all that great a sense of the sound of the progression. I think maybe when I do my next set of lectures, I'll be doing them in a different classroom that has a less out of tune piano. Okay, so here's setting up the key of D major, 1, 4, 5, 1. Told you it was bad. Yeah, that is a little bit better. Okay, now 4, 5, 1 using mode mixture. And now 2 diminished 6, 5, 1. There's that lay. Okay, and here is the final chord progression. I'd like to turn next to a couple of examples that are in your textbook. Would you please pause this video and go get your textbook if you don't have it in front of you? And once you have your textbook, would you please turn to page 546, page 546. We're going to listen to this example in F major. This is the A cadence from a chorale by J.S. Bach. We're in the key of F major. Remember that in F major, the mode mixture note is D flat, and there it is, D flat. This is a 2 half diminished 6, 5. The D flat is kind of like a neighbor note above the C, and as a neighbor note, it has much more of a pull back to the C because it's a flatted note. So it substitutes half step motion for whole step motion and makes a very effective sound. So listen to the sound of this mode mixture chord, 2 half diminished 6, 5 within the key of F major. Okay, and I'm going to move on to the next example, which is a song by Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel. This is on page 547 of your textbook. And right in the beginning, we have a couple of 2 half diminished 4/3 chords acting as neighbor chords to 5. So we go from a 5/7 away from 5/7 to this chord that has neighbor motion in the left hand, passing motion in the right hand, and we do that 2 times. Finally, I'd like to talk about the minor 4 chord and the 2 diminished and 2 diminished 7 chords as tonic prolongation chords, which includes their use in a Plagal cadence. Okay, so take a look on the board behind me. I have the progression here, 1, 4, 1. You can see that the 4 chord is acting as a neighbor chord to 1. See this neighbor motion here. The F sharp A goes up to G, B flat, and back down to F sharp A. So here's this minor 4 chord used as a neighbor chord. Basically what we're doing is we're just prolonging tonic harmony, as this second level analysis shows. And this is a G minor chord, so it's a mode mixture chord, it's the minor 4. When this occurs at the end of a phrase, if we have a minor 4 chord leading to 1, we would call this a plagal cadence. Okay, now you're used to the idea of 4-1 being a plagal cadence. Let me just give you a little bit more of an expansive definition of a plagal cadence. A plagal cadence occurs when you have a non-dominant chord leading to tonic. And what is a non-dominant chord? A non-dominant chord is a chord which doesn't have a leading tone in it. So 7 diminished 6 is a dominant function chord. Okay, it may not have scale degree 5 in it, but it still functions as a dominant because it has the leading tone in it. And that means that the leading tone cadence, 7 diminished 6 going to 1, is a type of authentic cadence. But 4 going to 1 is a plagal cadence. However, there are other types of plagal cadences, and we're going to encounter 2 more of them in this chapter. 2 half diminished 6/5 is very similar to 4. Just compare these. We've got a D in the soprano, we've got a G in the bass, we've got a B flat, which wants to go down to A. Okay, the only thing different here is that we have scale degree 2, which I put in the alto. This cadence, 2 half diminished 6/5 going to 1, is a plagal cadence because there's no leading tone in this chord. It happens that Mr. Brahms particularly liked the sound of this plagal cadence, and we hear it a lot in his music. Notice in this case that the 7th of the 2 half diminished 6/5, E, G, B flat, D is the 7th. That note does not resolve down by step because there's no C sharp in a D major chord. Instead, the 7th resolves by common tone. So if you want to do something wild and crazy with your 7ths and not resolve it down by step, this is a place that you can do that. Let me play these progressions for you. Again, I'm going to put the bass down an octave because I think it sounds less out of tune. Okay, 1-4-1. Okay, and then a plagal cadence. Okay, and here's the next one, which is the 2 half diminished 6/5. In my next lecture, I will take up additional mode mixture chords.